This video will give you a quick visual for how we can perform TLC in the organic chemistry lab. So notice we're going to use jars there behind the solvent bottles for our TLC chambers. And remember that to prepare a TLC chamber you need a paper wick to soak the solvent up and help it evaporate into the atmosphere in the jar. So we're just going to take a piece of filter paper and cut a flat edge on one side, and then just sort of cut the wings off the side portion so that we have a piece that looks about like that. And that'll sit flat on the bottom of the jar and fit easily within the jar. And that's our wick for our TLC chamber. Now we just need a little layer of solvent down on the bottom. So you can just pour about a centimeter's worth of solvent down into the bottom of the jar and cap it, and you want to let that sit for about 10 minutes or so that the atmosphere in there becomes saturated with solvent. To spot the TLC plate we use a microcapillary tube like the one you can see there, and I can reuse the same one over and over if I just put a little acetone into an Erlenmeyer flask and use that to wash it out every time I use it. So to do that I just dip it down into the acetone and touch the end to the paper towel I've laid out for my workspace here. And that'll drain the acetone and wash it out, and changing the view you can see that happening here. One more time, rinse it, and then just drain it right onto the paper towel. And that way you don't need a fresh capillary tube every time you take a sample. Alright, this is a TLC plate. And so notice it's a very thin plate. On one side there's plastic. That's not the side you want to use, that's the back of the plate. The side with the powdery substance, which is silica gel, is where we'll actually put our samples. So the first thing you need to do is draw the origin line down near about half a centimeter to a centimeter from the bottom of the plate. We have a ruler that we can use for a guide, so we have a nice straight line there. And using a pencil, not a pen, using a pencil you can just lightly mark the line onto the TLC plate there. And that's the line on which you will spot the sample, sort of the starting line for the race, if you want to think about it that way. Notice it's not so deep that it's gouged any of that silica off of the plate, just a light pencil mark on top. And beneath that line I can label the positions where I'm going to spot my samples with whatever kind of label would help me identify them. Again, using pencil to do that labeling. Now to spot our sample, we're going to take our capillary tube. You can see me cleaning it there in the background. We just dip that capillary tube into the sample that we want, and then sort of like a sewing needle, a quick straight up and down motion. Usually I test it on the paper towel first so that I have a good feel for what I'm doing. And then you just go right onto that origin line, right above the label for the sample, and spot it quickly. You'll see that repeated a couple of times here. So I have a new sample. I'm going to dip my capillary tube into it, test it out on the paper towel first, a couple of quick spots, make sure it's working well. Then I go right over onto the origin line and do the same thing. And then I just drain my capillary tube, rinse it with acetone, and I'm ready for the next sample. So again, walk you through it one more time. Third sample, I dip into my sample first, test my spotter on the paper towel, then right on the origin line above the label, I add a spot. Rinse my capillary tube, and then I have a fully spotted and ready to go TLC plate. All I have to do is put that plate in my prepared chamber and let it develop. So to do that, you're going to use a pair of tweezers. You can just pick that TLC plate up near the top edge with the tweezers and go straight into the jar, right down into the liquid, and lean it up against the side of the jar. Notice I'm leaning it on the opposite side from where my wick is. That way the wetness on that wick doesn't soak into my TLC plate. I want the solvent to rise from the bottom to the top, not to be leaking in from the sides because it's touching that piece of paper. After my solvent has reached nearly the top of my plate, I pull it out. And remember, as soon as you pull it out, you want to mark the solvent front, which is the distance traveled by the solvent. So at the top edge, where it was wet, that's where you'll mark it. You'll see I did that with a pencil. Right there is how far my solvent traveled on my TLC plate. And you have to do that quickly before the solvent evaporates. Now I just need to see my spots, so I can visualize my plate under a UV lamp using the shortwave setting. And you can see the plate will glow green, and any spots on it will have a dark appearance. And when you see your spots, you want to circle them, because you can't see them without the UV light, so you need to have them circled on your TLC plate so you know where they are. Just trying to circle one-handed there, so I didn't do a great job of it, but for the video it's okay. You can also visualize spots by dipping into a stain. So again, grasping the TLC plate up near the top edge, just dip right into your stain and then put it onto the paper towel so that any excess stain drains off. And you can dry the front and back pieces with that paper towel if you want to. And this type of stain, the spots will develop within about 2 or 3 minutes. You can see they have a yellow appearance on the purple stain. And there are actually now some spots that you could not see by UV alone. And then the final step in TLC analysis is to measure the RF values using a ruler. So again, you're just going to measure from the origin, which is sort of like the starting line, all the way up to the solvent front. That's as far as anything could possibly travel. And then you'll measure from the origin to the center of each spot on the TLC plate. And from there, you'll be able to calculate the RF values of each individual spot by dividing the distance the spot traveled by the distance to the solvent front. Remember, that value is just a proportion for how far your sample traveled on the plate. Did it travel 20% or 50% or 80% of the way to the top of the plate? Then finally, when you're done with your TLC work, you can just dump the solvent into the waste and just let that jar air dry. You don't need to rinse it out with water, because the people coming in behind you don't want to have a wet jar, they want to have a nice dry jar for their work. And there's nothing in there really to rinse out. And that's it for this video.